Hello there! Just before we kick off today's video, I want to give a quick plug to the topic raised here. I wondered of course of adding some image files to existing objects and then discovered a file wrapper and Django's media download tools. Another important point were to write and add some custom exceptions, Django's default exceptions and database exceptions. The finish point were the goal of getting familiar with logger and debug log file for further collecting and possibly important error data. So let's focus first on settings PY and static files configuration. For this info, I'm grateful to Coding Entrepreneurs channel as this topic was comprehensively disclosed there. Beforehand, we need to define our static URL. It means that URL that refers to a directory which contains static files. Static URL. Then define a static root, passed to a directory with static files. Static root allows us to load static files and use them in templates. The static template tag is used to build the URL for the given relative path, using the configured static file storage, instead of writing the whole URL to the source of static or media files. Media URL and media root have quite the same settings, but specifically for media files like images or even text files. Static files include media and JS scripts, with CSS files for instance. At the stage of the development, work with static and media files is achieved through the debug mode set to true. OS module in Python provides functions for interacting with operating system, so that the makeDirs method will generate all necessary directories referred to static and media files. OS join method will join the main path of our project directory with separated static and media files directories. The last important thing is let's try to add some pictures to our objects like users. In order to satisfy the need of files being downloaded or uploaded, some extra image and media fields were added. As a result, our forms should satisfy file uploads too. To do so, I need to pass the file data from request into the form with adding request files parameter. The last thing is also to change our HTML forms to multipart form data type. Otherwise, request files will be empty. File wrapper in views convert a file-like object into an iterable. The main goal here was to define and get paths to our object, get media itself and guess accurately its file format. Then set the name of downloaded file. Last thing is to return a response type with first download of this file, outlined with new parameters. Now let's refer to some other Django features like model instance reference. Let's access our model again and add getAbsoluteURL method in order to create a direct link to our user card. However, object ID parameter in this case will be not order, but user ID, as our goal is to get all orders from a specific user from admin panel. I reckon this makeshift as a useful tool to modify Django admin panel. Other models are equipped with the same method that refers directly to model's object. This view is provided with limited access of admin now, so that we cannot change user's card and glance shortly for Jane's orders. In line with Django documentation, this is a good practice to use getAbsoluteURL in templates, instead of hard-coding your object URLs. This is another way this method is being used oftentimes in templates, as we can put direct link to object easily. Considering Django as a Python web framework, let's take a look also to user-defined exceptions. Exceptions need to be derived from the main exception class, either directly or indirectly. Although not mandatory, most of the exceptions are named as names that end in error, similar to the naming of the standard exceptions in Python. Here is some custom-built simple exception when user's authentication was failed. But let's try to get familiar with Django middleware first. It is described widely in documentation and is a low-level system plugin for altering request-response processing. In our case, we will add some Django middleware for exception handling, explicitly for HTTP 404 and 403 handlers. Middleware has a standard function process exception that takes a parameter of the exception appeared during a current session before our appropriate view is launched. In general, 404 error is a page not found error, and it should not have customizable messages, simply because it should be raised only when a page is not found, so it's been done mostly with educational aim. Let's try to configure our Django's default login configuration. In self-documentation, you can grab a configuration dict which writes all login info from the framework named logger to a local file and paste it to our settings.py file. Then we need to add some configuration. like file parameter into handler section of login dict in order to write all login info from the session to a local file. The next step is to check how our handler works. To do so, let's reach non-existing URL and check how our local server will react. Our logger automatically defines the level of severity, so now I'm gonna put a logger message into a models method. Self-representation of the error as a simple string data message appeared too, when raising HTTP 404 resolver exceptions. This exception was processed through the middleware code by handler and rendered error message directly into a template. However, for a certain user, this data might be inappropriate. Basically, custom messages are not very common for the client, based on forums and other developers' experience. I hope you found this video interesting. Please hit the thumbs up button below, and as always, thank you for watching.